Hello everybody, hope you're doing marvelously well. This is very exciting. Today, iZOTOPE have released Ozone 9 and we are getting to try it out. I don't use Ozone 9, so this is going to be a new thing for me. One of the things this has is a sort of AI feature, machine learning if you like, where you can lay in an already mastered reference track and then it will read it and take the EQ and compression and all the other settings and then apply them to your track. So that's something I really want to try out. Plus I just want to hear some of the presets and just see how Ozone 9 works. One of the best things about this is you have 3 chances to win this. Thank you iZOTOPE for letting us have this to give away. I really appreciate it. So don't forget to enter to win. You know how to do that. One of the things now that we're increasingly mixing in the box tends to happen is we tend to mix at almost mastered levels. I find almost every mix I do in the box and every mix I've ever been sent that's been done in the box comes in like pretty darn hot. You know, we end up putting stuff on the master bus and use it a little bit more aggressively than we would when we're mixing through consoles. That just by nature seems to happen. So I have quite a few mixes here that are not necessarily square wave, but are printed pretty hot. We also have a track that I mixed that I referenced an older album to do. And I also have the benefit of a world-class mastering engineer doing that. So we're going to see how that shoots out later on using those as references. But I think the biggest thing for Ozone 9 for me is to see what it does with those in-the-box tracks. Because when you've committed and you're starting to get tracks that are almost, I wouldn't say square-waved, but are pretty close to being limited, what can it do with that? Because that, quite frankly, is the world that most of us are in. We're getting tracks all the time. Mastering engineers are getting them. They're not quite blobs, but they're very, very aggressively compressed and limited. So this is going to be an interesting thing for me. So let's start off by listening to it in those scenarios, and then we'll go and test out its reference mode and the mastering assistant. Okay, so let's start with the Young and Restless. So we've got the mastering assistant here. I'm going to go for high intensity, and I'm going to go CD. And I'm not going to use a reference. I'm going to go modern, because even though it's a rock song, I want it to sound as modern as possible. So I'm going to start somewhere in the middle of the song. Now you can see this is printed loud and yeah, it's printed loud. You know, I had it slamming through the console. So there's probably not a lot it's going to do. Certainly not a lot of limiting. It's already, you know, pretty hot. We've selected CD, which is the hotter of the 2 options. If you remember, streaming here is -1, CD is -0.3. Okay, so let us keep it on modern on the module. Let's go in and read it.
We are the young and restless, together no one can stand against us. We are the young and restless, we are one. We are the young and restless, together no one can stand against us. We are the young and restless, we are one. You gonna fall down, but you gotta stand up. With every sunrise, new beginnings will.
Cool. Yeah, listen.
We are the young and restless, together no one can stand against us. We are the young and restless, we are one. We are the young and restless, together no one can stand against us. We are the young and restless.
That's nice. So what it's done there that I've noticed an enormous amount, now we've gone to dynamic EQ, is it's controlling some of that harshness. There's a little bit going on in this area here. What are we looking at? About 1.5. And it just, where it gets a little too aggressive. There's a little bit in that 600 where you get to the vocal. And there's some low mids there being pulled out, being controlled.
We are the young and restless, together no one can stand against us. We are the young and restless, we are one. We are the young and restless.
This, I feel like, is probably 99% of the time how this plugin is going to be used. Because the reality is that most people mixing in the box these days are mixing and their files look and sound like the files I did there. I believe that mix was done in the box. I did it in the box. And I'm printing Loud and Proud, and that is really where we're at. So immediately this tool is solving issues. It's solving that buildup of low mid. It's getting rid of a little bit of the honkiness in the vocal, around, which is typically always around about 600-700. You know, pulling some of that out, and it's controlling some of the high mids, which are a little too abrasive. Okay, good work. Made absolute perfect sense to me now. Sliding doors, as you can see, another track that I'm printing super, super hot. Okay, so again, mixed in the box. So let's go and do the same thing here. Go to high intensity, so it really controls it to its maximum. Go to CD, so it's printing the maximum thing. And let's listen to that section. So here it is. So it's very interesting. These are songs I mixed. These are songs I mixed. These are songs I mixed inside of a box. And you can hear similar-ish kind of areas. So there's little build-ups, a little bit air on the high mids where it gets a little harsh. But roughly again about 600-700. In this part of the song, getting a little bit nasally there. Again, because the vocal's like sitting right up there on the mix. It's pulling out some of that. And again, some low mid cuts. And then some nice control on the high end. So, but again, what it's doing is very, very tasteful. It's tasteful. And I think a perfect, use of a plugin, perfect for the modern age when mixing in a box. Let's do a before and after again. Here is the after first. The two things I really notice are the tame. When I took it off, I missed the taming on that kind of on the vocal, and this in the vocal. I missed the taming of it. Really beautiful. I also really enjoyed just that low mid cut. What I do really, really like, and it makes me very, very happy, is it's not doing any crazy stuff in the low end. That's one of the things that's really, really important for me, is getting great detail down the low end. It has not done any hard work down there, so that's really excellent to see for me. I want to try a more classic kind of rock thing with our friends Robert John and the Wreck. Here's the track Whiskey. It's probably a real average, everyday kind of experience. This band, we recorded this, we did the whole album in one day, tracked everything live in a studio, 10 songs, and there's no samples or anything on it. So this is real world experience. Let's go. I'm not going to use the reference. I'm just going to go to high intensity, Loud and Proud. I'm going to hit the vintage control. We haven't used the vintage yet. So let's see what it does. We'll keep, you know what, I'm going to make it CD destination. Let's have a listen. Accept.
Raising up here, falling like the hardest stone that ever fell. Blame it on a bad dream. No one didn't mean a damn thing.
I mean, going back to the original mix, which I did, sounds like a sock is over it compared with that. This has so much more life, but not to the detriment of making it sound too bright, fizzy, and clinical. I think that that's probably a very, not probably, definitely a very, very smart thing that they've gone for this vintage EQ comp and limiter. They've added something where they're brightening the overall mix, which is pretty much the requirement of any mastering engineer to bring out the detail on the top end. I've never met a mastering engineer that doesn't work in that area. Okay, maybe they're taming it as well, obviously. But it's also not sounding like it's taking my head off. This is really nice.
Tale while you was raising up here, falling like the hardest stone that ever fell. Blame it on a bad dream. No one didn't mean a damn thing. Anything to keep yourself from coming clean.
I love all these controls here, low boost, 30 to 5. I love this.
Telling in a tall tale while you was raising up here.
That's really powerful EQ, really powerful EQ. You really felt that doing something. That 0.9 of a dB at 60 makes a huge difference. Let's see what we got. Okay, so we've got modules modern and modules vintage. Vintage, I assume, would be maybe additional warmth in the low mids, maybe a smoother high end. I'm not sure. But I hear that's a new feature. It says create a processing chain using non-vintage modules. Okay, using vintage modules. Okay, so that would probably be tube with tube gear, or tube emulations, I should say. Things with transformers, emulations of things with transformers to give it more weight. Destination streaming or CD, that's a nice feature, because obviously levels for streaming and CD are very, very different. It says maximum ceiling to -1 dB and -0.3 dB. Yeah, that's good, because you've probably read, if you haven't, you've heard that streaming sites now will turn your music down. If it's too loud, they'll turn it down. And that could be detrimental. So you don't want to hit it too loud. So that's nice. All right, so the intensity control here, we're hovering over it. It says set the target loudness to -14 LUFS, -12 for medium, and -11. So obviously, wherever you go, it gets louder and louder. So you've got low, 3 dB down, 2 dB, and then, well, -11 LUFS. So that makes some sense. Now I wonder, I played it from the top there, and there's quite a quiet intro. And then the whole band comes in and that djembe comes in with a super powerful low end. So I'm going to do a couple of things. Well, let's accept this and have a listen. So this is where it's been listening to the front and from when the rest of the instruments came in. So now I'm going to listen.
Whoa.
I like this. Fast and slow attack character, transient, sustain, so stereo independence, transient emphasis. I'm really kind of excited to hear this because actually that sounds really good, to be quite frank. Now I'm going to listen to the actual master. Back to the Ozone. Emily's has got the mid-range more forward, the vocals more pronounced, the low end's tamed. And it's all very, very obvious. Now, I will say, as I was saying earlier, I started it early on before that happened. So let's do it differently. Let's go back to the master assistance. And I'm going to go high intensity so it's louder because Emily's was a lot louder. And now I'm going to go and play it from when the djembe's already in. Of course, so here's a suggestion to help you get started. See, I like that. It's not telling you, hey, you know, this is the second coming. It's saying to get you started. So let's listen to it in context. Here is, we're going to start from that djembe again so we get the low end. So now the low end is a lot more controlled because I started it at the beginning of when the djembe came in. So if you're going to use the mastering assistant, be smart about it. Take it to a section that's going to tell it more information about the song. So by starting it on the djembe with a low end in, it's taken that far more into account. Listen to Emily's. Back to Ozone. I'm intrigued to see how this stereo independence is going to work. So what I'm doing is I'm giving it a little 2K boost. It adds a kind of glassiness to it.
Everybody knows how it's supposed to be, and everybody knows it's all about me and all the people that surround me. We just wanna be free. Oh, everybody knows.
Interesting. It's becoming so much closer. I mean, the mix assistant has allowed it to, it's a lot more controlled. It's controlling issues in the low mids, which is making it sound a little bit more punchy. It's controlling that. But I dialed in a bit more low lows, just a tiny bit, just to give that a little bit more oomph on that boom on that low end of the djembe. And then I've been messing here, you can see, with some of the high mids, just trying to bring the vocal forward. I don't know if I've quite got it yet. You can hear it's getting a lot closer to Emily's master. Now, obviously, Emily is a world-class mastering engineer with years of experience making incredible masters. And I'm doing my quick version here, but you can see with the Master Assistant solving some of the problems for me, where it pulled out some of these low mids, and then by me dialing in like some low lows, it's getting fairly close. I mean, I'm not going to win an award. I'm certainly not going to win a Grammy for the master here, but that is a pretty reasonably good sounding master for a guy who's not a mastering engineer and has spent 5 minutes on it. Let's have a listen again. Lispy. I think maybe I'd pull back some of those high mid boosts there, or I could put a de-esser across the whole mix. Not unheard of with mastering engineers. I did crank the output here to get it to the same kind of competitive level that it was for the CD. You know, I've done 2 changes there. I brought the vocal forward by bringing up the high mids, and I've done that low lows, and the rest of it was done by the Master Assistant itself. Now let's try something really kind of fun. I am going to get rid of this, completely clean it out, put another instance of it on, just so there's nothing saved from there. So here we have a new instance here. Now what I'm going to do is we're going to do something pretty radical. I'm going to take, we'll go back to the high intensity. I'm actually going to take the reference, because this is a more reality. Who's going to have the opportunity to take an already mastered track and compare it? The exact song. I mean, maybe you could. You're going to pay somebody to do an amazing master and then try it. It's not the real world. But how about this? When we produced this song, when we were working on it, we referenced Trevor Hall, as I was talking about earlier. So let's load in a Trevor Hall track. Green Mountain State. This is off Trevor's record. This is like off the record Chapter of the Forest. It's got like 30 million plays or 31 million plays just on Spotify, let alone everywhere else. And all the other things. So keep it modern. I think that's the way to go. This one was mastered by Adam Ayan, who's another amazing mastering engineer. Adam Ayan, Emily Lazar, both incredible talents. So now I'm going to press play on this. That's interesting. Using the Trevor Hall song as a reference, it has done some of that high mid boost. I was doing it a little lower down to try and bring out some of the sort of vocal up front, but it's doing that as well. It's a bit more exaggerated. It's near the top. It's got some mid-range cut. Bear in mind, both of these records were recorded and mixed by me on this console in this room. Djembe was on both songs, and it's interesting. Obviously, different days, different singers, everything, but interesting how it analyzes the EQ. I don't expect it to sound anything like Emily's master. It's all about family and all the people that surround me. Just wanna be free. Interesting. Again, using a reference track of an already mastered one, not the same song, a different one. It's made it bright. It's brought the vocal forward by that high mid boost. And then there's this sort of top boost. There's a mid-range cut, which is quite a difference between Emily's version and this. It's interesting. It's like a different way of doing it. What is the moral? I suppose you find references that are as close as possible. Not just to how you want it to sound, like Boom and Fizz and having great air over the top or good low end or, you know, really detailed mid-range, but probably similar kind of arrangements. We did sort of do that. Now, this will really, really throw a Spaniard in the works. Why don't we load in Emily's track. So now you see we've loaded it in, we have Green Mountain State, which is actually quite dynamic here. So probably was not a great example to use. Now we've got Emily's version of Everybody Knows. This is a reference of Emily Lazar's master. Okie dokie. Now it's interesting. First thing I did was raise the threshold there because it was being a little too aggressive at everything it's applied. But essentially, sonically, it's really close. There's a boost in the high end there. It's not as detailed crazy as I would have thought. It's got a hyped high end, which is similar to what it was doing when it was bringing in the other track by Trevor Hall. It was hearing more high end. However, now it's more gentle. It's got a little bit of a lift down in the lows there. It hasn't ducked as much in the mid-range. And it is a darn sight closer. It's much, much closer now. Still that low mid ducking going on there. A little bit in the mid range, about 2K. We were boosting before just above it here. It's not exactly the same, but it's much, much, much closer. So very, very interesting technology. I think all of this has sort of shown us the same thing, is like it's going to read and understand other tracks. And I think the best way to do this is to take different references that you like the sound of and see what you can do, you know, to really, really improve it. That was pretty interesting for me because I didn't know how sophisticated it was going to be, but it's pretty darn sophisticated. Does it sound exactly the same? No, because Emily would have got there through many other different ways. Top mastering engineers would use hardware as well as software and a combination of stuff. Hers is really, really, really clean and loud. As this is getting louder, which happens quite a lot, I can just hear a little bit of like grit coming in. But dang, it's pretty darn close. Now, again, there is no way you're going to have the luxury of having a world-class mastering engineer up against it. But it does prove the fact that it can get super, super close given the right materials. So thank you ever so much, iZOTOPE, for letting us review this and also giving one of 3 copies that you can win. There's 3 copies to win here. You know what to do. There's all kinds of links and stuff dancing around here, I should say, to enter. Please give us any feedback. If you've used Ozone before, give us some feedback. You can see this is an incredibly useful tool, especially for those of us that are mixing more and more in the box, where mixes tend to come out with a little additional compression and EQ and even limiting. And that it really does prove itself well. I really liked, obviously, the unfair advantage of having a world-class mastering engineer and being able to take their information and apply it. That really came out really quite nicely and was a lot closer than I would have imagined, given, you know, it's ears versus gear. However, we're not going to be in that situation very often where we have the track mastered by a world-class Grammy-winning mastering engineer to do it and then compare. But it did favor very well. I think ultimately this is going to be a tool for those of us that are mixing in a box and need to get master quality as quickly as possible. The fact that it sat there and it pulled out these low mids, harshness in the high mids was really good. I should probably have found a bad mix with really bad low end issues, but fortunately all the mixes that I did here unwittingly all didn't have any low end issues, but they did have some low mid stuff, and that's quite important. So thank you ever so much for watching. Don't forget to enter to win one of 3 copies. Have a marvelous time recording and mixing. Leave us a bunch of comments and questions below, and we'll see you again all very, very soon.